Hi everyone, great to see everyone. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes just to allow everyone to join on time. Hi everybody, nice to see everyone filtering in. We'll be starting shortly. Okay. Right, I'm gonna get started with the webinar, and then everyone can sort of filter in while I'm doing the spiel at the start. Okay, welcome everybody to our Climate Change Special Interest Group webinar. Today we have the fantastic Sarah Golding with us. And just to give you a rundown of today's webinar and timings, so I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to UKSBM and our special interest group and the other special interest groups. We're then going to hear from Sarah on her work, and then we do have a portion of time at the end of the webinar for a Q&A and some interview questions if we have time. And we should be finishing promptly between 12:55 and 1. So if this is your first time attending any kind of UKSBM webinar or workshop, welcome. UKSBM is the UK Society for Behavioural Medicine. It's a network of academic and clinical health researchers who are interested in applying knowledge, theory and evidence on health-related behaviours to improve the health and well-being of people in the United Kingdom and beyond. So we pursue knowledge to inform the prevention, diagnosis, treatment and rehabilitation of illness, and we actively seek to inform national policy and guidance relevant to our field. So what do? Well, we do webinars like this one. We also run an annual conference. The 19th UKSBM meeting took place last year in Glasgow, and this year our conference will be taking place between March 25th and 26th in Bristol. Registration is still open, so please do come along if you are interested, or if you're already signed up, then do come and approach Mia and I, because we will be there at the conference. We also are running, as part of our Climate Change Special Interest Group, a pre-conference workshop on sustainable research practices for early career researchers. This will be on the 24th of March, so the day before the conference starts, from 2 till 4:30. You can register online on the UKSBM website, so please, if you'd like to learn more about sustainable research practices, do join us for that free workshop. The UKSBM has a very active early career network, mentor schemes, and 2 established special interest groups, which were the cancer interest group and the young adults interest group, and the 2 new special interest groups, which includes ours, the climate change special interest group, and also medicine optimization if you have other interests in these areas. In terms of membership, the full membership is £30 a year, £20 for early career researchers, and £15 for students. The benefits that you get with membership, the main one is that you get discounted fees at the annual conference, but you have a range of other benefits, including access to a mentoring programme, opportunity to win prizes, free membership for the International Society of Behavioural Medicine, webinar events like this one, access to an early career network and to other special interest groups and events, member-only access to resources and videos from conference meetings like this one. This one is going to be recorded today, free access to particular journals, and the opportunity to contribute to and influence the growth of behavioural medicine in the UK. Just a very quick overview of our special interest group. So our aim is actually to provide a forum of ideas, knowledge, information, and best practice for those interested in the application of behavioural medicine to reducing the negative impact of health-related consumer behaviours on climate change, encouraging and facilitating the adoption of sustainable consumption behaviours, and also strengthening our understanding between the link between planetary and human health for a sustainable, equitable, and resilient future. And we aim to enhance our networks and collaborations to help tackle the climate crisis via individual level, population level, and multi-level interventions and systems level thinking. We do have some available roles. We have a communications officer role, and we also have an events organizer role. At the moment, it's just Nia Coop and I as co-chairs. But if you are interested in being involved in a special interest group and would like to have a bit more of a hands-on role, please do talk to us at any point. And without further ado, I am just going to move on to Sarah and our webinar today. So Sarah Golding is a health psychologist who works across disciplinary and sectoral boundaries to explore the links between human, animal, plant, microbial, and ecosystem health. Sarah is based within the Environmental Psychology Research Group at the University of Surrey, where she currently works as a Knowledge Exchange Fellow for Access, which is advancing capacity for climate and environment social sciences. We are delighted to have Sarah join us today. So Sarah, would you like to go ahead with your talk?
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Tess, for the introduction, and to both of you for the invite. It's lovely to be here today. Really excited. I'm just going to do that awkward moment where I pause to share my screen.
Absolutely, no worries.
That's the one, I think. Okay, it'd be great if you just let me know once that's up. You can see the title slide.
All good to go. Yeah.
Right, okay, so I'm going to chat to you all for about 30 minutes or so. Tess has already introduced me. I'm going to talk very briefly towards the end of the project. End of the talk about the Access project. But yeah, I'm an early career researcher. I work across interdisciplinary boundaries. And yeah, I'm just here today to share some of my kind of research journey with you all. So let's see how this works. There we go. Right, so today, yeah, I'm going to spend a few minutes at the beginning just talking about some of the different ways we can think about health. Then I'm going to present 3 different case studies, if you like, 3 different research examples from my own work, drawing on animal health example, public health, and an ecosystem health example. And then we'll wrap it up towards the end, thinking perhaps beyond One Health towards planetary health perspectives. I've tried not to clutter my slides too much with loads of references, so if you do want to follow any of this up, there's a QR code there. It will appear a few more times during the talk on the different intersection slides, and I can always email it around afterwards if anything's needed at all. So okay, so yeah, I'm basically going to tell you 3 short stories embedded within my larger kind of research story about my own interdisciplinary research journey. So quick intro to me. I guess I just kind of want to share first, a little bit about myself. Probably as a child, I was probably already a more than human thinker long before I knew what that phrase even meant. As a kid, I was highly concerned about the environment. You might have described me as a bit of a child eco-warrior. I was always kind of like pestering my parents to turn lights off and do we recycle paper and things like that. I grew up aware of the greenhouse gas effect as it was then, and things like acid rain, and I kind of wanted to give all my money to wildlife charities and things like that. So not that I had a lot of money, but I thought we should donate to wildlife charities. And then as I kind of grew up, I didn't really know. I probably, if I'd had maybe a different schooling, different set of circumstances, I might have fallen into like a conservation career, but I didn't really know how to translate this passion for the environment into a job. And so I had a very non-linear, non-traditional academic career. I basically worked in retail, finance, banking for most of my teenage and 20s. And I trained, well, I did my undergraduate degree in psychology part-time through the Open University. And then I sort of finished that, took a couple of years out, and then I discovered health psychology, and I was basically hooked. It is endlessly fascinating to me, the ways in which our psychology, our social stuff influences our health outcomes. And I did my master's and then my PhD at the University of Surrey, and alongside my PhD I did some portfolio work to kind of get the health psychology qualification, which is a specific quirk of the UK system. I won't bore you all with that now, but it basically meant that I got involved in lots of different projects. So and I was always particularly attracted to the public health end of the spectrum. So I was involved in projects looking at organ donation, food purchasing in supermarkets, some what we might think of as a traditional health psychology questions, so patient-doctor communication, those kinds of things. So I've worked in lots of different areas, but often my work sits at the kind of boundaries of disciplines. So not just bringing in perspectives from health psychology, but also social and environmental psychology, public health. And I've worked with lots of different kinds of practitioners, so vets, doctors, farmers, medics of different descriptions, and so on. And so very quickly, I'm not going to go into this in too much detail. UK Society for Behavioural Medicine, you probably know how a health psychologist thinks about the world. Behavioural medicine, there's loads of similar disciplines, but I know not everyone on the call necessarily comes from a health background or from that kind of behavioural science background. In a simplistic way, what health psychologists are interested in is how our thoughts, our emotions, our habits, our social norms, the people around us, how these kind of psychological and social processes influence human health outcomes, often via a particular health-related behaviour. So we work within this kind of biopsychosocial model perspective, and the idea is that we want to understand the experience of being ill or being well, what drives these things, and then of course with hopefully with the goal of improving health outcomes, right? So we might want to work to support people to change their diet or how they travel to work or their sleep behaviours, all these kinds of things. So this is a kind of very simplistic understanding of how a health psychologist might think about the world. But of course, we know it's much more complicated than that, really. Even if we're focused on specific things like emotions or attitudes, people who work in behavioural medicine, health psychology, public health, we know that health is not just influenced by individual level factors. Many of you might be familiar with the wider determinants of health model that's widely used. Social and environmental factors also contribute to health outcomes for people. And actually, in many ways, simply targeting individual level factors like a psychological process might not actually result in that much behaviour change, because all of these other things are happening in the world around us that constrain our behaviour or potentially help us change our behaviour. And so during, oh no, that's fine, I was just checking that wasn't me echoing back. So during my master's and my PhD work, I became increasingly disillusioned, especially during my PhD work, which I'm going to talk more about in a moment. I became disillusioned with the idea of having to frame my work within kind of narrow psychological models. And so I naturally, as I said, I was always attracted to public health questions anyway. And once you start incorporating or encountering these broader models, they just make more sense to me. I'm much more interested in understanding the complexity of the wider picture, even if for pragmatic reasons you focus on something quite narrow. But of course, we're here today to talk about what it's like being a more than human health psychologist. And so actually, my PhD research was around antimicrobial prescribing in livestock medicine. So now antimicrobial prescribing we'll come on to, it is a public health problem, but it's also an animal health problem, and it's also an environmental health problem. So human health really doesn't exist in a vacuum. We are embedded in these dynamic ecosystems. When I did my psychology training, we're taught that, you know, psychological processes, humans are embedded in social worlds. So our behaviour, our thoughts are always socially situated, is a phrase that gets used a lot. But we're also physically situated, and we are also part of these, you know, complex, wonderful things called ecosystems. And all of the different areas of work that I kind of, my research has been involved in, things like infectious disease, biodiversity loss, and then the bigger kind of planetary crises that we face now, like climate change, insecurity, migration, all this stuff, they're all intertwined, and they all will have impacts on human healthcare, human health outcomes, but also impacts on more than human welfare as well. So that's what we're here to chat about today. And to bring it back to, you know, what might more than human health psychology look like, I guess really all we're doing is changing our health outcome of interest, right? So instead of worrying about whether or not humans thrive or get ill, we're worrying about whether animals thrive or get ill, or whether ecosystems thrive or suffer. And then once you change your health outcome focus, then you just change the behaviour focus. But at the beginning of the process, it's still humans. These issues, these challenges are still people driven, right? Whether we're thinking about protecting pollinators or we're thinking about protecting rivers, often it's humans that are causing some of the challenges that we're facing, or many of the challenges that we face. So that's my opening kind of provocation to say that health psychology can be much broader than just thinking about human health outcomes. And now I'm going to just change it up a bit and give you some specific examples. So starting with my PhD, my doctoral research, I was co-supervised by Jane and Helen, who are respectively a health psychologist and a farm animal vet. And I'm going to say it now so I don't forget to say it for the whole talk, but thank you hugely to everybody I've worked with on these various projects. It's so much fun being part of interdisciplinary teams and just working with really cool people. I've been very lucky so far in my career to get that. So I'm going to talk about antibiotic use in UK livestock medicine. But first, what is antimicrobial resistance and why is it a problem? Basically, when we think about the microbial world, as you're probably aware, microbes can infect us and make us sick. Not all microbes do that. Many microbes live on us and in us and don't cause any problems whatsoever. But we share a microbial world with other forms of life and also with the environment. You know, microbes can be, they are feisty little things. They're amazing. And within that microbial population, whether we're thinking about bacteria or viruses or fungi, they carry resistance genes. And what that means is if a bacterium infects us and makes us sick, we use a drug, an antibiotic, to treat us. But some bacteria will carry genes that make them resistant to that treatment. It means the drug becomes ineffective or less effective at treating us. And the more we use drugs, the more we drive the development and the spread of these resistance genes across the microbiome. And just to make it a little bit more scary or a little bit more cool, depending on your perspective, bacteria can swap resistance genes, so even between species. So, you know, if you want complexity, go and have a look at an AMR systems map. That will probably break your brain. It does mine. But anyway, the point about all of this is that AMR is complex, but also it threatens both human and animal well-being. Because in the immediate sense, we can't treat infections when they make us sick, but in a more sort of distal way, it also does things like threaten food security. If we can't treat a herd of sick pigs, for example, what does that mean for food security? But it also antibiotic use underpins much of modern medicine. Things like cancer treatment, where we suppress the immune system, relies on the ability for us as human medics to have access to effective antibiotics. So there's real world, huge implications to this if we run out of effective antibiotics. But the impact of AMR can be reduced through what we call stewardship intervention. So basically supporting clinicians and patients and pet owners and livestock owners to use antibiotics in the most effective, most appropriate way possible. And there's lots of different definitions of that. I'm not going to go into it, but yes, so it's about using antibiotics in the right way at the right time, at the right dose, and so on. And ultimately, these are behavioural challenges within human and veterinary medicine. And if we look at the literature, certainly when I looked at doing this for a PhD topic, I thought I'd do a classic, if you like, human health psychology, doctor-patient communication type PhD. And when I looked at the literature, it's been done. The human health literature around antibiotic use and prescribing is very well advanced. There's systematic reviews of reviews and so on. We know quite a lot about what works and what doesn't in human medicine, but almost certainly when I started my PhD in 2015, almost nothing had been done in the veterinary world, and certainly very little specifically from a social science perspective. And so I basically conducted a series of studies, mixed methods sort of PhD, looking at what are the different things that drive antimicrobial usage decisions amongst farm vets and farmers. And it's important to note that in the UK, the vets prescribe antibiotics, but actually there's a lot of licensing. Farmers are allowed to keep stock of antibiotics on farm, so they can do the direct administration themselves. So it's important to look at both groups of users. And across the 3 studies, so I spoke to vets and farmers. I also did a couple of surveys with practicing farm vets and with veterinary students, just to try and get a sense of what's driving their usage decisions and what do they think more broadly about the problem of AMR. And what I found was that there's a number of different barriers. So vets and farmers and vet students, they understand the problem of AMR. Knowledge might be an issue with some individuals, but at a broad level, knowledge isn't really an issue. People know the problem, they know the threats, they know what they're supposed to do, in inverted commas. But they definitely face different barriers. So the vets and the farmers themselves face a different set of challenges. There's some overlaps, but there's also some different specific things. And there's also lots of complex kind of thoughts and feelings and emotions around this. There's a lot of ambivalence towards, feeling both responsible, but also feeling like this is a big problem and actually it's everybody else's fault. My behaviour is fine, it's all the other people. There's loads of interesting stuff happening there. And I kind of, looking at it through a social identity lens, we can maybe think that it's a way of sort of self-protecting and shifting the blame onto other groups. But also maybe that reduces our own sense of responsibility and action and motivation to take action for ourselves. So that's some of the kind of high level findings. And then, as I mentioned, I think I've realised through putting these slides together, my sort of research career has been an exercise in ever expanding concentric circles of, well, this model doesn't capture enough, let's expand it, let's look at something more broadly. And I settled on social ecology. So one of the brilliant things about working on interdisciplinary projects is you're not constrained by the models that come from your own discipline. Social ecology is something that's increasingly used, particularly in public health kind of questions. But basically the beauty of social ecology frameworks is that it helps you to make sense of your data, the phenomena, at different levels, right? So what's happening at the individual level, what's happening between people, and then what's happening at different levels of our physical and social environment. And there's several different models out there. So they help us understand the phenomena at different levels. But what's also nice is they help us think about where can we target our interventions. Do we want to target our interventions with individuals, or might we have better effect if we think about targeting it at a different level? So as I've mentioned, probably knowledge-based interventions to change behaviour in vets and farmers, not that likely to work in this situation. Whereas drawing on, the economics of farming are pretty broken for lots of farmers. So maybe economic incentives. I don't like to always draw on economic incentives, but industry targets have actually worked to help shift sort of behaviour in different contexts for this particular problem. So that's just a kind of highlight of my PhD research and thinking about these complex health behaviours and trying to capture that in different ways. And then bringing it back to our One Health model, my PhD research was very much focused on animal health and wellbeing. Vets and farmers are super concerned about animal health and wellbeing. That should absolutely be upfront. That's one of the core things. They get blamed for not necessarily, for not focusing on the right things, but at the heart of their decision making is the welfare of the animal. But then this also has knock-on effects, whether we're thinking about human medicine or veterinary medicine, for all other parts of the biome, the microbiome itself, but all other living animals. You know, antibiotics and are also used in things like aquaculture and horticulture as well. And the challenges of climate change, habitat loss, etc., they all interact with the problem of antimicrobial resistance and changing patterns of infectious disease and emergence of novel zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are those that originate in animals and pass between animals and humans. I think we're all familiar with COVID being one of those examples. So pausing to take a breath and then shift it up to a public health example. So this is a different project that I was involved in. This is some of my postdoc work, again based at the University of Surrey within the environmental psychology group. And this again was a multidisciplinary team of people from Surrey and Plymouth, and also colleagues from Natural England. So we had a practitioner view in our project team as well. And essentially what we were doing was looking at the ways in which nature engagement supported well-being for people during that first sort of year or so of the COVID-19 restrictions. And I just want to highlight in the section that you're about to see, there are some images. They came from participants, and we have permission to share those photos, and all of the names you see attached to them are pseudonyms as well. So yeah, so thinking about how environment intersect with public health, which was sort of changing our direction of focus, if you like, through that One Health lens. There's an increasing body of literature that shows that engaging with nature is beneficial for humans. You might argue that if we were to step out of our westernised, disconnected, highly industrialised lifestyles, many people around the world already know this. We might not need an academic literature to tell us that, but here we are. But there is a huge literature, you know, spending time engaging with the rest of the natural world is linked with better physical health outcomes, better mental health outcomes, better community outcomes, things like improved mood, increased concentration, lower rates of depression, all kinds of different benefits. And I'm not going to go into the inequalities literature here, but just to flag that, you know, not everybody likes nature, not everyone feels comfortable in nature. So it's not a panacea, it's not a one answer for everything. And access to good quality green and blue spaces is not equal. There are inequality and social justice issues wrapped up in all of this. But as a broad concept for what we're about to talk about, nature's generally good for us. But what about during a public health crisis? What happens when people can't access their favourite spaces, or they can't travel to the coast, or they can't engage in the activities in which they would normally do in those natural spaces that they normally do to help their health and well-being, right? So you can't play sports, you can't meet with friends, you can't get to a different type of landscape. And so the focus for this project was to basically, again, a mixed methods project, looking at how people did or didn't engage with nature, how this might have changed for them during COVID, and what impacts this had on their well-being. And it's important to flag as well that the two studies, the first two, the longitudinal survey and the social media, were very much focused on lockdown periods, but the qualitative interviews, we asked people more explicitly to talk about their nature experiences before, during and after the lockdown. So the story there is a bit more timeless, I suppose. It's, you know, we used a lockdown lens, but certainly the themes that came out of that data have much more kind of timeless qualities to them. And so the short answer is that people absolutely adapted. Even if they couldn't get to the places that they would normally go to, people still found ways to engage with nature to support their well-being during COVID. There's a growing literature on this. We probably all know it for ourselves anecdotally. We felt better if we could get to the local park. But some of the key highlights from the project, so from the longitudinal survey, which is a representative sample of people from England, we didn't prime them to say, did you go to nature to get away? We just asked people, where did you go to get away from the stresses and strains of the pandemic during lockdowns? And the most commonly, people were free to mention whatever they did. We coded this afterwards. The most commonly mentioned spaces were private gardens, public parks and bedrooms. But across all of the different types of spaces, we found that well-being was higher. We measured 2 or 3 different types of well-being, and well-being was generally higher when people could get away in outdoor spaces, wherever they were. We also found that kind of digital nature engagement through social media supported people's well-being during the lockdowns. We analysed Facebook comments in response to 2 feeds. One was the kind of Spring Watch, BBC short Spring Watch videos, and the other one was Chris Packham and Megan McCubbin, the kind of isolation bird club type, basically broadcasting from their back gardens. We looked at the comments that people posted, and we found that, even this digital nature engagement, they're short comments, it's short, we don't know how long time people were spending engaging with this stuff, but there was still a complex cognitive and emotional dimensions in the comments that people were posting, lots of positive emotions, some negative, people reflecting on, what they were seeing, what that might mean in relation to the pandemic or the wider state of the human-nature relationship. But also importantly, there was, the comments were indicating that people found watching these videos was giving people a sense of respite and distraction from what was happening around them, lockdowns and all of the associated worries that were happening. So if we can't get into actual nature, digital nature can still be a good substitute for us. And then the last thing, which I'm going to say a bit more about on the next slide, is the qualitative interviews which I led. Spoke to 34 people, and the key theme that came out of this, we got a huge amount of really rich data from it, but the thing that really struck me and kind of helped me kind of consolidate my more than human thinking, if you like, is the fact that the nature engagement, what seemed to be supporting people's well-being when they talk about how they engage with nature, is that it's dynamic and it's relational. So spending time engaging with a natural space, whether it's a short moment or a longer moment, a small space, a large space, watching the bird from your window, whatever it might be, is that nature engagement is offering, or it's facilitating moments of interactions with people's self, their sense of self, their mental well-being, with other people. They are social spaces, and also more than human. So the animals, the plants, the abiotic, the weather and so on. And it's in these interactions in this relational space that some of that sense of well-being seems to be coming from. That's kind of what we would argue with the data that we found. And so just to kind of flag this, share a couple of photos. The joy with which people spoke about their encounters with non-human animals, just magical, just, wonderful interviews to do in lots of different ways. Obviously that not everybody likes animals and not everybody likes all animals, but when people were sharing these positive stories, they were absolutely wonderful to listen to. But also people make sense of the world through their relationship with the more than human. So there's a lot of kind of symbolism and metaphor, probably culturally based. I'm sure it'd be different if we were to do this with different communities in different countries. But a lot of people talking about marking the passage of time by watching vegetables grow or seeing spring bulbs come up, and that giving them a sense of hope. And also trees, the meaning that people evoke in trees around the sense of permanence relative to our own lifespan, that kind of thing. And the last thing I want to kind of highlight is the embodied nature of these experiences, particularly when we think about feeling the sun on our skin, or the wind in our face, being in water, those kinds of things. So they're really rich, dynamic experiences being in nature. It's not a passive thing at all, these nature engagement experiences. And a few people in our interviews also reflected on, when they were talking about these interactions with the more than human, there was also an opportunity for them to reflect on the broken relationship that humanity currently has with our precious planet, and all the different ways in which we're damaging it, and how that's a source of tension and sadness for lots of people, as we're all well aware. So I'll leave that there. I could talk about that for an hour, but I won't. So bringing this back, why is it important that we look at the relationship between people and the rest of nature? So our emphasis here was on a public health question, well-being during a public health crisis. But actually this also matters, as I think the last theme kind of indicates, because people vary in how closely connected they feel to nature, and there is a body of evidence that says people who are more connected to nature also, yes, it's associated with greater well-being, but it also predicts care and concern for the environment and for more than human life, and is associated with likelihood of taking action, albeit that action is often constrained by wider systemic challenges. But nonetheless, being connected to nature is good for us. it's good for communities, and it's good for the planet. Okay, final deep breath and final gear change. Ecosystem health. So here I just want to flag my colleague Melissa Marcel, who I work with at the University of Surrey. I'm about to talk about behaviour change for biodiversity conservation, and Melissa is definitely leading the way with this. She's done some excellent work and has, you know, been involved in lots of different pieces of work. And where I get to come into this is that Melissa and I co-wrote a book chapter. So Melissa's an environmental psychologist, but is very much focused on the same as me, the interplays, the positive interplays between biodiversity and the natural world and human health. And so yeah, Melissa brings the environmental psychology and the health expertise, and then I kind of bring the behavioural science expertise, although Melissa was already an advocate of this. So why should we care about biodiversity decline other than the fact that it's heartbreaking? Biodiversity decline, the loss of natural species other than humans, is happening at a very rapid rate, and the rate at which it's happening is kind of unprecedented. And a lot of this is due to human action. So yes, climate change, but also the way that we use land, habitat loss, destruction of, say, peat bogs, forests, etc., our agricultural practices, increasing urbanisation. There are ways we can do this well and sensitively with the environment front and centre, and there's ways we can do it far less sensitively. And there's loads of reports out there that give you all these kinds of sad and depressing statistics about the state of the natural world. But in a positive way, you know, this is recognised at international, supranational level. There are increasing calls for action. We absolutely need to protect and restore nature in the same way as we need to mitigate climate change, you know, reduce our carbon emissions and so on. And behavioural science in all of its forms can help to guide our interventions for change, whether we want to think about helping individuals change their behaviour or work at these kind of higher group levels or governmental levels. And so this is the work that Melissa and I have written about, and Melissa has certainly championed in practice as well, is using something that comes from health psychology, the behaviour change wheel. If you're a member of UKSBM, you're probably, I imagine, familiar with the COMBI and the behaviour change wheel. It's something that's increasingly widely used in public health. Not everyone uses it or is familiar, but the core idea behind this is that there's a synthesis of theories that sit behind this that kind of say these are all the things that we know influence human health related behaviours. And using this theory, we can then, once we've determined what it is that's driving a particular behaviour for a particular person in a particular context, everything's contextual, we can then choose a theoretically appropriate behaviour change intervention. So going back to the example from my PhD, if a lack of knowledge was a problem for vets and farmers, we might use an educational based intervention to increase the knowledge. But because we know knowledge actually probably isn't the problem for that population, we might look elsewhere in our theories of what's driving behaviour and our potential toolkit, if you like, of potential interventions. And this is the work that Melissa has led and that I'm kind of here championing as well. The behaviour change wheel can be applied outside of health behaviours. This is already starting to happen, but I think there's a huge scope for its mechanisms to be used in other areas around environmental challenges, because as I said earlier, whether we're thinking about a health related outcome for humans or for animals or ecosystems, people are driving the problem and people do behaviours. Now, I work with sociologists and anthropologists, and I know my language is going to be critiqued by people. That's totally fine. Today, I'm talking about it from a psychology perspective. So the behaviour change wheel, if we're thinking about biodiversity conservation, it prompts us to ask a set of questions. So the first thing is, what are the specific behaviours that need to change? So let's say, for example, we might want to reduce pesticide use, or maybe we want to increase plant diversity in hedgerows to support a wider range of wildlife. So that might be the behaviour. We want people to stop using pesticides and plant newer types of plants, right? And then you need to think about, well, who's going to change their behaviour? Is it farmers? Is it other types of landowners or land users, tenants, etc.? Not all farmers own land. Is it legislators? Is it industry bodies? Is it charities who might have influence on, say, citizen science projects, or people who visit their land? So we need to think, you know, who are we actually targeting our behaviour change at? Then we need to think deeply about what are the barriers and facilitators in that specific situation. How do we stop people using pesticides? What's stopping them? Is it a fear of a crop loss? Is it a fear of an economic impact? Is it simply habit? We've never stopped to think about how to do something differently. And then you might think about the facilitators, like maybe financial incentives or other kind of structural incentives, changing social norms, consumer demand, that kind of thing. Once we understand the barriers, we develop better interventions. That's the basic premise behind the behaviour change wheel, is if you understand the theoretical drivers of a behaviour, you can design theoretically appropriate interventions that are more likely to be effective, because you're actually targeting the thing that's the problem. So that's an overview of the behaviour change wheel and how you might be able to apply it to human health behaviours, biodiversity behaviours. But one thing to flag, this is kind of already known, I think, in public health, but is definitely the case when we look elsewhere, is that whenever you can use the behaviour change wheel to forward plan and design an intervention. You can also use it to look backwards at what we're already doing and find evidence gaps or find intervention gaps. And some of the work that Melissa and her colleagues have done has basically, you know, looked at national biodiversity action plans and kind of analysed policies and seen, you know, are we making full use of all our available intervention options? And the short answer is no. There's a huge amount of gap in this space. If you're a behavioural scientist who likes using the behaviour change wheel, I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, and you want to do something to help save the planet, go and have a chat with Melissa and come up with some exciting research projects to spread this out. Anyway,
Sarah, just to say 5-10 minutes to go.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think I'm about on time. Thanks, Tess. So that's so just to wrap this bit up then, why does biodiversity conservation matter for human and the rest of animal health? Ecosystems are complex and dynamic. We're all affected by changes, and declining biodiversity threatens all kinds of things that you'll see, probably some themes coming out through this talk. It intersects with the genetic diversity and resilience of different species. It can be a threat to food security. It can impact the ability of carbon sinks, such as forests and peatlands, to continue to hold that carbon. And of course, it affects our own human health and well-being. And there's a growing science around how biodiversity is linked to human health. So weaving all of that together, this is my kind of One Health journey, if you like, working at different parts of the framework, not necessarily focusing on the bits that are interlinked, but, you know, always working in that space. And I guess, so in a way, I kind of now think of myself as a bit of a more than human health psychologist, because it's not just about health. For a while, I thought of myself as a public health psychologist. I thought, no, that's not quite right, because I'm interested in animal welfare and I'm interested in the ecosystems. And as I said, all of these things intertwine. A lot of my research, I've realised, kind of intertwines around land use behaviours. So whether we're thinking about the local space that we use for our own recreation and well-being, or we think about how farming systems work, there's a land use element that's happening to this. I wouldn't claim to be a land use scholar, but maybe I could have been a human health geographer instead. Disciplines are fuzzy. It's fun to work across them and then realise that you're all kind of doing the same work anyway. And as I've already mentioned, these things all intertwine and affect each other. So maybe this is me thinking that, you know, I need to move on to One Health. I haven't done this in my research because, as I'll explain at the end, I'm not working on a research project at the moment. But there is an increasing momentum for people to use, think, teach, research within a planetary health framework. And some of this is linked to the planetary boundaries work that comes out of Stockholm, which is, you know, basically looking at the different Earth systems, and as this scary orange and green picture shows, how many of those systems have been breached. Essentially, this is things like climate change, the acidity of the oceans, the ways in which we're changing freshwater systems, and so on. And if we look at the image on the other side of the screen, planetary health framework is beginning to bring all of this stuff together. It's looking at the earth systems, but it's also thinking about nature, it's bringing in complexity, it's bringing in equity and social justice, and then also thinking about how can we change all of this as well. So there's plenty of further reading if anyone's interested. And from a practical point of view, none of us are going to be working on all of this at any one point, right? But it's just to kind of flag that these things are part of the puzzle, and about trying to hold them in our awareness as much as possible. I haven't talked about health inequalities, social inequalities today because of time. I wanted to focus on the One Health picture. But actually, One Health, of course, means One Health for all humans as well, right? We need to break down these systemic barriers that are challenges to health equity, but also social equity and, you know, climate. It's often the same people who are most affected and potentially least responsible as well. We know this in the climate justice literature. And also animals other than humans have a right to live on this world too. So just to flag that there's a justice and equity issue in all of this, and again it intertwines. And the most recent Planetary Boundaries work talks about a safe and just operating space for humanity. So the justice part has been added. And to bring it all up, where does this crazy, slightly odd journey bring me to? I now work on a project, we're about halfway through a 5-year project called Advancing Capacity for Climate and Environmental Social Science. And sometimes I've felt out of my depth on this project because I come from a health background, not a climate background. But then I kind of remember, hang on, there's always a health angle. There's always a health angle to, you know, energy justice. Can you heat your home? Can you keep it cool in the summer, for example? These things influence human health. I'm part of the guiding principles team on the Access project, which we try to integrate sustainability, co-production and equity and diversity and inclusion into our work, because this is how we co-produce these fair and just futures. So this is it. So in a way, I suppose, although I'm not doing directly a health related project right now, my One Health background and my transdisciplinary or interdisciplinary background has helped me secure this role, and I think set me up really well to be part of this big knowledge exchange project. And I suppose the key message from all of this is that, as I've already touched on with some of the examples, but certainly a driving message, a key message that comes out of the Access project, is that these huge environmental challenges we face, these planetary crises, are human-driven. They're social-driven problems. And so we need social, cultural, human-led solutions, not just technological solutions to tackling all of these things. And that's it. My closing provocation really is just to kind of wrap it up and say, well, I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something or thought differently about it. I've certainly learned to think differently about all of this over the last few years. And just to kind of pose, thank you for whoever's clapping and the heart. Oh, you're so lovely. Just to pose, you know, how might you be able to adopt a more than human perspective in your own work? Or how could you apply a One Health or planetary health framework? So there's some great papers emerging, looking at this intersection between health, health psychology, behavioural medicine and climate, but also biodiversity. A lot of the narrative and emphasis is on net zero and energy transitions, rightly so, but let's not forget the nature recovery part of this as well. So yeah, that's it. And that's me. Thank you so much for listening. There's the reference QR if you want it. I'll stick it in the chat if I remember in a moment. And yeah, if anyone wants to follow up or now or afterwards, happy to chat. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, for such an informative and comprehensive overview of your work. It's absolutely brilliant to see everything you've done. Just for the audience, if you would like to ask Sarah a question, please do put it in the chat or in the Q&A section on Teams. Or you can feel free to turn off your microphone and ask Sarah yourself. While everyone sort of gets their questions already, I do have one for Sarah. Just based off what you were just talking about in terms of how researchers can get involved in nature recovery action, do you have any sort of examples of what we can do day to day to sort of be more biodiversity sort of champions ourselves?
Absolutely. You mean in our kind of everyday lives, taking the step out of our professional? Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I think for me, I get hugely overwhelmed by the climate and biodiversity crisis. It's massive, it's planetary, right? That's why we have a planetary health framework. And I'm one person, but and I've had my own wobbles and mental health struggles with this, right? But where I sit now is that I'm lucky enough to have a garden, and I'm lucky enough I got an allotment last summer as well, after 5 years on the waiting list. And I'm in control of what I do with that little tiny patch of the planet. And so I can choose to plant pollinator-friendly plants. I don't use pesticides in my back garden. I don't use slug pellets. I learned to live with slugs. I learned to live with slugs a long time ago. And actually, if you put a pond in your back garden, if you have a garden, for example, if you start to see your garden as an ecosystem, we have hedgehogs that visit our garden because they come for the water. And then they also eat the slugs while they're there, so that's lovely. That's just a little like an anecdote. Not everyone has a garden, not everyone has time, etc. I suppose some of the ways you could get involved are, there are other kind of citizen science projects that a lot of the kind of conservation charities run, so things like the RSPB, Royal Society for Protection of Birds, the wildlife trusts, butterfly conservation, the big butterfly count that happens every summer. So there are the UK conservation charities are pretty good places to start. They've got loads of useful information on their websites, and if you wanted to get into it, maybe not in a research way, but if you wanted to think more, you know, a lot of us are researchers, so we like detail and geekiness. There's the People's Plan for Nature, which was a big citizens' assembly, and I think it was organisations like the National Trust and that were involved. But basically, you know, like understanding what the UK public think about nature and how we can support nature recovery. Yeah, I think that's probably a place to start.
Yeah,
pollinator-friendly plants. Add water to your garden if you can, and also try and get time in nature every day. If you can take a walk and talk meeting outside, or you can go for a walk through a park in your lunch break, because it increases your own nature connectedness, and that's good for everybody.
Fantastic, thank you. Lots of great starting points there. Does anyone have a question for Sarah in the audience? No, well, I'll go ahead with another question. Same thing, but in terms of what we can do in terms of being more nature focused within our own research and teaching. Do you have any ideas of that?
Yeah, so well, I think if we wanted, in terms of our own teaching, I think the thing is to maybe, if we've never done this before, we never thought about it, maybe just think about how our own work links into a One Health framework. So I'm actually just going to quickly share my slides, because I was thinking about this, like how, because it might not seem relevant in terms of your own work, but one of the things I was thinking is you could maybe look at your own methods that you use, the methods and frameworks that you use, and think how could they be applicable for nature-friendly behaviours, for environmental behaviours, much like Melissa showcased with the behaviour change wheel. Where can we take something from one discipline and apply it to a different discipline? Another way we could maybe think about this is, what health-related behaviours or conditions do you already work with? And are there ways in which we can think about those health behaviours in terms of what are sometimes referred to as co-benefits? So is there a benefit, for a classic example is diet. So reducing red meat consumption is good for human health because it's related to lower rates of colorectal cancer, for example. But it's also good for the planet because red meat production is much more carbon intensive and greenhouse gas emission intensive than other forms of meat production or other, you know, plant-based diets. And another idea that you could think about if you work with long-term conditions is whether, for example, there's scope to trial nature-based interventions for well-being. So my master's dissertation was looking at the impact of exposure to natural or urban images on rumination, which is a thinking style that's associated with depression. I didn't find it. The short answer is no, but we did find other effects in that study. But I can remember kind of doing literature searches at the time and coming across, I think it was a paper with women who were recovering from breast cancer and then had the opportunity to engage in nature-based interventions afterwards. So, you know, nature is good for us in lots of ways, whether it's our own direct well-being or whether it's thinking, thinking about, you know, it's not going to help you recover from cancer, but it might support your well-being around the recovery from cancer, kind of thing. So that's, there's some ideas for thinking about. And I guess the other thing is just trying to think systemically more often. You know, when we're teaching our students, even if we're focused on public health or individual health level questions, maybe just a little flag at the end of your session that says One Health might be a way of doing it. Yeah.
Fantastic. I think systemically is a nice little soundbite for everyone to sort of hold and think about in terms of their own work. Final call for any questions for Sarah.
There was a question in the chat.
Oh, thank you. Oh yeah, I was looking at the Q&A. Yes, thank you. I'll just read. I'll say it out loud in case anyone knows. So with the thanks, Harry. With the nature engagement project, did we look at negative connections with nature? And do the metrics for nature connectedness include negative interactions? Oh, I don't actually know about the nature connectedness metrics because there's several out there. So I wouldn't want to say that none of them. I don't really want to say they don't measure negative interactions. I think it's more of a scale of, so the ones that I've used, it's more of a spectrum of I'm disconnected from nature, I'm totally integrated with nature. Negative interactions though. On the project itself, we didn't explicitly ask, but people did freely share negative interactions. So like with the social media, some people really didn't like wasps, and there was all kinds of some people loved the videos of wasps, some people hated the videos of wasps, for example. And then in the interviews, there weren't people didn't necessarily bring up negative nature. There were negative experiences, but they were related to their experiences of interacting with other people in a natural space, not the natural space itself. So in our study, that didn't necessarily come up, but there is definitely work out there looking at negative perceptions, negative experiences in natural spaces. So fear, Birgitte Gattersleben, who is my boss at Surrey, she's done work looking at kind of perceptions of natural spaces and basically when being in nature is not restorative, because it isn't always restorative all of the time, even for people who generally find it. So safety is a big issue, and there's gendered aspects to that and racialized aspects to that as well. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Great, thank you, Harry, for asking that question. Sorry, I couldn't see it on my interface, so I'm sorry if I ignored anyone else's question. We've got, just a couple of minutes left. Anything final anyone wants to add? No? Okay, well, it's been such a pleasure, Sarah, to have you today. Thank you so much for speaking. I found it really helpful and actionable within my own research, and hopefully the attendees felt the same. But thank you everyone for coming along to our Climate SIG UKSBM webinar today, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I couldn't see that in the chat. The questions coming up, that was really weird.
Okay, that's fine. I've just noticed there's a great question as well from Ellie that came in right at the end, but I would definitely pick that up because I work with her.
Fantastic. There we go. Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. That was brilliant.
Do you want to?
It was great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no worries. Shall we jump off this call and just? Is that great? And then and then it stops the recording, doesn't it?
Indeed.
All right. I'll speak to you in a moment.
See you next week. Bye.